Today's show is brought to you by Kegerator.com. Join the free Brewers Club Rewards program at Kegerator.com and start earning and spending points with every purchase. You'll also earn status perks, which allows you to receive bonus points and free gifts from Kegerator.com. Go to Kegerator.com right now, use the promo code HHH, and you'll receive 5% off your order. That's Kegerator.com, promo code HHH.
Entertaining shows with content that spreads information and sparks discourse throughout the community. This is the Pearl Media Network.
Welcome to the Homebrew Happy Hour. This is the show where we supply the answers to your homebrewing questions and discuss all things related to craft beer. If you have a question you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, visit homebrewhappyhour.com and click on the submit a question link at the top of the page, or now you can call or text them in by using 325-305-6107. I am your host, Joshua Stubing. Today I am joined by the Director of Operations at cmbecker.com, Mr. James Carlson, who I unmuted just now. How are you doing, my friend?
Hey, I'm doing good. How you doing?
Fantastic. It was good to see you recently.
Yeah. It seemed like it was just yesterday.
It seemed like it was just dad jokes all day from James Carlson. We, yesterday, or pardon me, people who are watching our show, which I highly recommend you do, a listener did tell me I don't promote our presences enough. So please go to youtube.com/homebrew happy hour and check out all of the content. It's not just episodes. We actually have a bunch of different content. Mr. James Carlson is probably the most popular content we have right now. My friend, you did a video going over the differences between the Grainfather, the Mash and Boil, and the Robo Brew. And I want to say it's got 11,000 views over the last 3 weeks since we published it.
Wow. That's hard for me to imagine anybody would want to watch what I have to say.
Yeah. Maybe it was just the keyword tagging, but no, no,
that's gotta be it.
I know you read the comments because you're like me. We're nosy people.
Right.
The comments have been really positive, and people were asking a lot of questions, and then you are actually going out of your way to answer people too. So I appreciate you.
That's no problem. I think here's the thing, and you and I both are YouTube addicts. Gosh, when you pull up a video, you want something that's to the point and answers the general questions that you have. You want to be able to watch it and get on to another video. But these 1 hour and 2 hour videos, I just can't do. So I think that was you, not me.
Unless it's like a documentary that you're purposely going to find, not like an on the fly. Like when I need to fix the plunger thing in my toilet. I don't need a 90-minute video on that.
Yeah.
I just need where do you put your hand and where does it go? And then I'm done. I agree. I'm with you too. You described it perfectly when you said YouTube addict. I am totally addicted to technology in general. But, what I was saying too is people who do watch our show will notice the clothing difference. When I first got you on, you said, "Oh my God, is it that cold?" And I don't know if I'm getting sick. My office was set at like 64 on accident. And right now, I think outside it is like maybe 68. So obviously being a Central Texan, James, that means it's the winter blizzard of 2019. I look, as you so lovingly put, like I'm about to go skiing.
You do, and I just picked up lunch. And it was 74 degrees outside.
Oh, I need to go outside more, man.
Yeah. Anyway,
your face says everything. Thanks a lot.
Anytime.
Man, we do have some small talk to go over. One, my pop and I finally had our first all-grain brew day.
I saw that. That was impressive. You did a good job. I did want to ask, how were you on gravity? Did you nail the gravity?
We nailed it perfectly.
Perfect.
I owe you a lot of gratitude because I think in the first 10 minutes of the brew day, I think I texted you twice, which isn't abnormal for my brew days, but you are very responsive. And if I had it pulled up on my phone, you gave me you held my hand. I loved it. My dad was so nervous about doing all grain, and I was like, Dad, I know what I'm doing. I'm a pro. I'm on the Homebrew Happy Hour. I know what I'm doing, Pop. And he said, I watched the video that you weren't in, that you were recording. And I have some questions. And so I said, he'd asked me the questions. I said, oh crap. Hold on 1 second. I turned around. texted you, then turned back around and said, "Oh, Dad, it's this and this. Here's what we're going to do." So thank you, James, for helping me.
Hey, anytime. I was glad to see y'all finally make the jump into all grain.
Yeah, I'm really happy to do it. We did that IPA. Joe made us a recipe using the Brewer Friends software, and he printed it out for me. Very easy recipe builder to do. My only question that I had with you was, because it was our first day, you had to help me with kind of the standard stuff to all grain brewing, which I wonder if on brewing software, if that could be included. I only say that because Joe did what's natural to him. He made a recipe. He uses Brewer's Friend religiously, and I guess, we've gone over this kind of thing before. There are things when you brew for a while in any given style, brew in a bag, partial mash, or all grain in a cooler system, there's gonna be things that like the back of your hand, that the new person may not know. Like for me and my pop, we weren't 100% sure. Oh, is mash temperature the exact same? Is the steps of this and this? And you were, again, I'm so grateful for you, because you were like, okay, what are you brewing? How many pounds of grain do you have? And you walked me through the math of it, and it wasn't nearly as complicated as I thought it was. I think I overcomplicated it in my head, and when you explained it, I was like, oh, that's very straightforward.
Yeah, there's nothing to it. Here's what's cool about what y'all did this last weekend is you had full control over the conversion process. So you could choose to make that dry. You could medium body, light body, full body, sweet. All of that, it has to deal with the temperatures. And, we talked about the strike temp, hitting that. And it sounds like you nailed that. And it held temperature for the whole hour.
Yep.
Had no problem sparging. As long as you know those steps and you follow those steps, you're going to be successful. And that's what's cool about all grain brewing.
It is. And I'm very grateful that it was that kind of straightforward. As long as you follow the steps, hit your numbers, you're going to have a good time.
There you go.
And we did, thankfully. My dad did say, though, because of the great feedback from your Kolsch recipe, he told me, and again, I didn't even have to push him, because people listening who know me will say, you probably influenced him. But he said the next beer we do is a Kolsch. He got so much positive feedback. There was a birthday party for my nephew on Saturday. We brewed Sunday. That Saturday I got there, and some family member had just finished off the Kolsch. So after I punched them in the face, I told my dad, we got to have another brew day, because we're not going to keep 10 gallons of IPA on both. We're not going to do a 5-gallon tap and a 5-gallon tap. I'm probably going to take the other 5 gallons home. What do you want to put on the other tap? He said, oh, obviously a Kolsch. Everybody loves it. I said,
yeah, it's super simple to make.
I said, obviously, Pop, you are right. And I thought too, man, the time I spent up at HQ recently, and the last time I was up, I've had delicious alt after delicious alt. I'm going to try to convince him to also do an alt day soon. It's not going to be as easy, because, like, alts are not, they're not easy.
It's not, but it's very hard beer to brew, and you've got to be very patient. So you can't, like, the cool thing about Kolsch, it's super simple to brew. Not a lot in the grain bill, one hop edition. It's drank young, so it's a fresh beer. You can literally have, and we've talked about this in previous episodes. I've had Kolsch coming out into a glass 14 days.
Yes.
From the time I brewed it, not when the fermentation ended. 14 days from when I brewed it. So you pitch enough yeast, and you can get done, like typically our batches of Kolsch now, because we propagate and all that. We can brew on a Friday. We can cold crash on a Monday, because it's at terminal gravity. I mean, it's at final gravity. Yep. So then you have the opportunity to condition, and it will actually clarify in just that short little time. So the remainder of those, 11 days, you can cold crash it and then keg and carbonate it. You're good to go.
Oh, I know it. And I know, again, not how good of a recipe it is, because when I went up there 3 weeks ago, Todd had basically a full keg of your Kolsch on tap. When I just went up there again, between just the people who visit him, like his family, it was gone. It was completely, there was none of it left. I didn't throw too big a hissy fit, because Todd was actually sick, which is, by the way, why he's not on today's show, friends.
Yeah, he That's rare.
It's so rare. And so Monday and Tuesday, Monday he came to the office and left early because he looked like death. And I think everybody basically there told him, please don't get us sick. Please don't get us sick. And yesterday, we were recording this on a Wednesday. Tuesday, he didn't even try to come in. Thank God, because he looked terrible. And I hear, though, he's there today. Have y'all quarantined him in his office to make sure he doesn't get y'all the plague?
And that's hard to do with him, because he's such a fireball. He's in there working, but he's got his door shut. So
good. I think door shut is like the equivalent of the 5-second rule to germs. You're all safe.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Which I guess the last small talk thing, we are recording this a little early, and I appreciate you for doing that me, because when people are downloading this, I'm going to be in Big Bend National Park with my pop.
I love that place. I'm so jealous.
Ooh, my newly retired pop and I are taking my oldest two girls, Elizabeth and Esther, and we're going to have a weekend. Friday, we're leaving at like 4:35 a.m. in the morning, and that still won't get us there till like 2:33 in the afternoon.
Isn't that amazing how far that is?
And we're not leaving the state. Like that's Texas for you.
Yeah.
And then we're coming home. We're gonna leave there like at 2 or 3 p.m. on Sunday, and we'll get home at 10:30, 11, between 11 and midnight. Because the girls have school Monday.
Yeah.
But
now they don't have spring break?
Not yet. So we're going now to try to beat the spring break crowd. Mm-hmm. Big Bend National Park, for people who don't know, is one of the most isolated of the national parks, middle of nowhere, West Texas. I mean, civilization in a bigger than a population of hundreds of people is hundreds and hundreds of miles away. It's not a convenient park, so most of the time of the year it doesn't get crowded. But during Thanksgiving break, during Christmas, New Year, and then spring break times, which is like typically the second week, third week, and last week of March, is when the park gets most crowded. And crowded at Big Bend is like, you couldn't find a camp spot of these 25, so you have to go over here. And I ran into someone on a trail. Like, that's crowded at Big Bend.
It's nice.
It is.
And don't they have the observatory there?
McDonald's Observatory is in Fort Davis. I think Fort Davis.
Is that far away?
It is about 45 minutes out of the park. Or to an hour, and I actually, not Fort Davis, is it Fort Stockton that the McDonald's Observatory is at? I haven't been in a while.
I was there when I was a kid. So
right, yeah, and I go to Big Bend frequently. I haven't been in a few years. I used to go every year, but I would just go to the park, get my hiking in. It also, too, is my detox away from technology. Because again, I'm very open. I am addicted to my phone. I'm addicted to social media. If people give me an inch of like encouragement by liking the things I post or laughing at the things I post, I go a mile and I just go overboard. At Big Bend, you can't, because there's no service and there's no Wi-Fi. So you have to be away from your phone.
I didn't know that.
There's none. Oh, I say there's none. You could probably find service somewhere in the park. I'm not going to be able to download the memes though and post all that kind of stuff that I like to do, but I'm really looking forward to it. But with all of that said, James, I do have questions for you since you did agree to do the show. I have to bring questions for you because if it was just me by myself, this would have been a very awkward episode. So question number 1 comes to us from Tom G, who used the submission form at homebrewhappyhour.com. Tom wrote, "Great show, guys. I've been listening from the beginning and really enjoy the show. I just wish you would have more shows than only one a week." Tom, I wish that I could do more than 1 week content. And poor James doesn't want to answer all these questions all this time. Yeah, I know you would, actually. Yes, you would. Anyways, Tom also writes, "My question is, I transferred a beer from one keg into another to change from pin lock fittings to ball lock fittings. It was properly carbonated and was delicious. The recipe was from Adventures in Homebrewing, good people up there, their backyard Pilsner. After transferring, the beer was flat, and even after a week, it still wasn't carbonated. The beer was clear and had a good head when poured before the transfer. I used CO2 pressure at about 2 pounds of pressure, connected the beer line to the outport on the receiving keg. I then raised the pressure back to 10 pounds. Even after 2 weeks, it's barely carbonated. I have 10 pounds of pressure, and there is pressure in the keg when I pull the pressure relief valve. It also dispenses at the same flow as the others I have on tap. I have a red ale and a light lager on tap that are properly carbonated and delicious. All are connected to the CO2 at the same pressure through a manifold. Any ideas as to why it does not want to recarbonate, even though it's the exact same pressure as before? I liked listening to your show. Have learned a lot. Thanks, Tom G. You know, there's a lot to unpack here. And it also seems like there could be a lot of factors we may not know. What are your initial takeaways from his question?
But I would ask, first I'd ask how much is in that keg.
Okay.
I don't think I can ever remember transferring from one keg to another, right? Even though I know I have. But I know that he's got the pressure set at 10 pounds. So let's say that he did flatten the beer, which I don't know how that would be possible in that little a time.
Right, yeah.
10 pounds isn't going to get it there if it's a full keg of beer. I would say that, if I was concerned about that, you can always redissolve CO2 back in that beer. So if it was me, I would probably force carbonate it to work to a level just under where you want to be, like 2.5 volumes, and see if that doesn't help. Because over time, at 10 pounds, if you got a 5-pound keg of beer, it's going to take quite a few days for it to.
Or a 5 gallon, right? Yeah.
Yeah. 5 gallons of beer setting at 10 pounds. Let's say it was completely flat. It's going to take a long time for that to dissolve back into the beer. So
which again, the confusing part is though how it could go completely flat.
Yeah.
And, like what factor? Is there anything off the top of your head that could be straightforward of explaining how it could have gone that flat?
Temperature is everything.
Okay.
Yeah. So temperature, the warmer it is, the quicker the CO2 dissolves back out of the beer. So if you warm beer up, CO2 is gonna leave it a lot quicker. So if you're transferring from one vessel to another, I would make sure that it's cold on both sides, because you're going to maintain that. If you can maintain that temperature, technically you can maintain the carbonation of the liquid if it's closed. But if you're in a warm environment, warm keg, it's venting while he's moving it over. It is possible that you can pull all the CO2 out as it's filling.
Right, and he did a closed transfer too, right? So
yeah, that's another thing I don't quite. Maybe it's me. I just don't understand that pressure. If he moved it at 2 pounds, I don't know if 2 pounds is gonna. I don't know. I just
it's confusing, right?
Yeah,
that was the reason I brought the question to the show, and of course, of all the times for Todd to be sick, because this is kind of right up his alley. Todd would also be the one. He wrote back on my email and said like, "Oh, I have a bunch of other questions," which I'm forwarding to Tom, who wrote the question in, but. It is peculiar, and I'm just wondering if there's can a leak on a gasket cause a beer to go flat?
Oh, sure. Yeah. In fact, a good that you brought it up. The kegerator in the brew room has got a leak.
Uh-oh.
So we had some Kolsch in there, and I had actually found a half a keg of that Pilsner that I did back in November.
No.
Yeah. 11/7 is when I brewed it, and it was done 11/9. Oh no, that was my progress. So it hit final gravity the first week of November. So it's been sitting in there for a long time.
I bet it's wonderful.
And it didn't taste too bad. It tasted kind of old though.
Really?
A little bit. You could taste it on the back end, but it's still totally drinkable. So I hooked it up, and when we came back from our trip to San Antonio, I poured a glass and it was totally flat. Went in there and the gas was gone. So it had been sitting there, and it leaked all the CO2 out, and the CO2 come out of the beer as well. So I've got to go in and test that system to see where the leak's at. So it is possible. Because I had it happen this week.
Yeah, it literally just happened. In an ideal world, what is a brewer or what is a brewer to do? Do you test the kegs weekly
soapy water?
But are you doing it even when the beer is actively on tap, or is that not necessary? If it's flowing good and is carbonated, you probably don't have to do the soapy water test periodically.
Well, every now and then I'll test my kegs, the kegs that I have for just because O-rings go bad, posts start to leak, and you can test it every now and then. I keep a bottle of soapy water, and if I suspect that I've got a problem, then I'll hit the whole top of the keg with it charged to see if there's any leaks.
Yeah, something I was thinking of while reading it. This might be the best case to upsell someone on a liquid and gas lines that have swivel nuts. So Tom, in the future, you don't have to change your fittings. You don't have to transfer the beer if you already have those two types of kegs. You just have to have the right distance and swivel it onto that line. And then, that's what I have on mine because I don't know when my dad's system and my system have that, because I don't know when I'm going to have what type of keg readily available to go on the lines, and switching out, if you didn't have swivel nuts, switching out lines or cutting the line and putting a new barb, and that just is not, that's counterintuitive to my lifestyle, James.
It's a lot of work and a potential leak.
Exactly. Well, that's what I mean. It creates a lot of unwanted variables to go wrong. And I am no stranger to things going wrong. So it might be worth Tom's time to, if he doesn't already, which I'm just assuming he doesn't, because unless for clearance space, I can't imagine why he'd want to have to have ball lock instead of pin lock, right? There's no.
We offer, C.M. Becker produces a short pin lock disconnect, so you get the same kind of height.
That's a good point.
And you got to think too, pin lock kegs are a little fatter and shorter, so height is not as big an issue, especially if you're using a pin lock keg with a short disconnect. You even have lower clearance with that keg. It's just a little fatter. So I would say, here's what I would tell him is I would go in and force carbonate that beer to a level that he likes, and then just see how that maintains. If it does, then it may be the fact that it just needed a little more help in carbonating, because the other two are fine, but they could be bleeding off pressure too. Just check everything out and then force carbonate and see what happens. You can always put dissolved liquid back into beer.
Right. And you've said that before. And I just want, before we end the question, I like going down rabbit trails. What is the worst case scenario? He's not going to have to pitch beer, right? Like, is there some times when you can't come back from flat beer?
I've never run into anything like that. Gas still dissolves into a cold liquid, and it also comes out of a warm liquid. So he should be able to recarbonate that.
Perfect. That's what I like to hear. Nobody, I assumed, because if I had to pick an issue with my beer, carbonation would be the issue I would pick, because it like oxidation, there's obvious byproducts of that. The off flavors. If my temperatures weren't good during fermentation, there's obvious byproducts from that. If my beer is a little flat and that's the only issue, I thank God, because it's like,
that's fixable. You can remedy that really quick.
Right, exactly. So thank you, Tom, for submitting the question. Moving on to the second question of today's show from Jesse H., who also used the submission form at homebrewhappyhour.com. Jesse wrote, "Love the podcast and loved my draft equipment from Keg Connection." Side note again, you don't have to name drop Todd's company for me to take your question. Generally, the rule of thumb is complimenting me, but this was a good question. So moving on, I would like to learn more about beer clarity. Could you do an episode on clarity and the different techniques like filters, straining, cold crash, Irish moss, etc.? My beers are always tasty, but sometimes has what looks like yeast particles. Any advice is appreciated. James, it's funny. During the brew day, my dad and I were talking. Apparently one of his old work buddies homebrewed forever ago and only did bottling. And he tried some of my dad's Kolsch that he had recently. And he told my dad, he was just so impressed at the brightness of the beer. And he said, dude, when I was homebrewing, which was like 15 plus years ago, he said, we would get the particles in our bottles. You could not get away from it. He goes, how are you getting it that bright? So I had to bring this question to you because my dad asked me, how do we get it so bright? And I said, let me call James. So James, you are a man of bright beer, especially recently. You've been on a bright kick.
Well, you know what? It's all about what you use. And I use, and the yeast is a big issue with brightness. And Imperial, As you know, I'm a big fan of Imperial yeast. If you want to shine as a brewer, I would suggest you use their line of yeast. They've got more cell count. They've got 2 billion on average. And it's highly flocculent. What that means is the yeast, after it eats out everything, they clump together and fall out of suspension to the bottom. And that is the best way to create a clear beer from the get-go. You can use Irish moss. You can use Whirlfloc tablets, the last 15 minutes of boil, and that helps kind of coagulate the proteins together. And that way you're not transferring cloudiness or haziness into the fermenter. There's a lot of things you can do, but the first thing that I would tell anybody is use a very good yeast like Imperial.
Right. It makes your life easier when you use good ingredients, because you can't cover up bad ingredients as easy as you can some other, I won't say flaws. Like a non-clear beer isn't necessarily a flaw, but if you don't have a good yeast that you're starting with, you're going to regret it because it's going to make it that much harder if you're going for a bright beer.
Right.
Jesse did bring up techniques like filtering, straining, cold crashing. I want to start with filtering because when I took a picture of that alt beer from Altstadt Brewery in Fredericksburg that you so lovingly bought me, thank you again.
No
one of the comments you made me was, "Holy moly, that beer is bright." Why were you surprised? The alt beers that you brew, first off, are always bright. The beers that we've had in Dusseldorf are pretty darn. I mean, they are clear as can be. But you seem surprised. Like is it not?
It was exceptionally clear, like water. So that had to have been filtered.
Okay.
As clear as that was, because as I can boast having a lot clearer beers than I've had in the past, but man, when you run those through like a production filter, now those filters aren't cheap, so you better be filtering a lot of beer. That thing was clear. I mean, you could read small typeface through it.
Well, that's why you were really impressed, and I was like, "Oh, if James is impressed, this must mean something." Because
it was neat. Because I went there and saw the facility, and they have spared no expense on that place. And they even have copper brewing kettles coming out of the ground.
I saw your photos. That place looks legit.
Amazing. So, if I would suggest anybody if they're in the Fredericksburg area, head out to Lukenbach on that road to Wild Seed Farms. You can't miss it. Stop. You will not regret it. It's a neat place to go visit.
Yeah, I heard rumors that they spent upwards of $30 million on the facility.
That's what they were saying. We went downstairs and there's a tap room downstairs and a wine cellar. And we heard a couple of people talking about it, local people that were there talking about that. That's what they had heard that they spent on it. And I'm telling you, it is a gorgeous facility.
So filter, like you said, they're obviously using a commercial filter.
Right.
Because my brewing experience has been around you guys, like you, Todd, Joe, and then what I do with my pop, I've never used a filter. Is filtering a technique common in homebrewing?
Not normally. I have a filter setup that I built, and it's super simple, and I can kind of give you a rundown. If you go to Amazon and you get your standard 10-inch, 2-inch by 10-inch filter housing, you can buy those filters, and they look like spun yarn. And I would go anywhere from a 0.5 micron to 1 micron, and that will get a lot of the yeast out. Now, if you go beyond a 0.5 micron, the prices of the filters exponentially rise.
Right.
Plus, you may not get it all through there. If it's the finer the filter, the harder it is to filter. And we have the advantage of having a conical and a pump. Well, when I say pump, not necessarily a pump. I use CO2 to pump and push the beer through the filter.
Right.
So that is an easy way of filtering your beer. So if you do the numbers on that filter assembly, you can go to Amazon for less than $20, buy the housing. And if you buy enough filter packs, you can get those filters as low as $1 a piece, depending on how many you buy.
Oh, wow.
So by the time that you get the housing and the filter media and the hoses, disconnects, you can have a pretty decent filter setup for less than $50.
That is cheap.
Yeah. But I will say this, you've got to have some kind of pumping system to force the beer through the filter before it hits the keg. So what I do on my conical is if you can picture it, I've got a 20-pound cylinder of CO2. I have made a tank fitting on the lid to the top of the conical, and I've got it connected to a regulator. So I've got my upper valve going through the filter and into the keg. So I charge the CO2, let the CO2 pressure the beer in the conical, and it moves it through the filter into the keg. Now on the outside, because you're filling from the liquid in on the keg, the liquid out,
right?
You're filling in from the liquid out. That way it fills from the bottom up. Your keg needs to be purged with CO2 so you don't have oxidation. And then you take the gas side of the keg, quick connect some hose into a bucket of water. As long as you do that, it's a completely closed, you will not have oxidation, and you'll have filtered beer. Now, I will say this, if you get the housing from Amazon, do not get the one with the bleeder button on the top.
Why is that?
Because sometimes those can introduce, because you got to remember there's liquid running through that filter assembly, and if that valve's weak at all, it's going to want to suck oxygen in, and then you're oxygenating the beer as it's going through the line.
Yeah, you're actually,
and you can see it little bubbles.
So
you don't want to do that.
Literally direct injecting.
You just made a tool to oxygenate wort. So stay away from the little red purge button on the top of those filter housings. And what I do is I let the beer run through the filter into a bucket to where you have a good steady stream, and then connect it to your keg and let it go ahead and fill. I've had really good, successful beer transfers by filter.
And we have that set up already up there at HQ?
We do.
Okay, that's the next video, man. I can already see my feedback inbox coming from, hey, on episode 122, James was discussing this filtering. I guarantee, like, next time I'm up there, would it be easy enough for us to make a quick video?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I think we've got that ESB in the conical right now, and then I've got that Beer de Garde in that funky, weird setup that you took a picture of.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Hey, okay. Yeah. Instagram.com/homebrew happy hour. James, Jesse, we're coming back to your question, I promise. But because, again, I squirrel, I have ADD, I think. Explain that photo of the keg in the bucket that I posted on our Instagram.
Okay. So we have a Pico brew machine. Zematic, I believe is what they call it.
Yep.
And it'll do 2.5 gallons of beer. Well, the machine is really cool because it's got a cartridge you just load, and we use it to test as like a standardized testing for beer kits and gravity and taste and all that good stuff. The problem is you can imagine you have to use a corny keg, and that you have to fill it up with the amount of water that you want for the batch. It tells you on the recipe generator. So once that all is going through, that keg is circulating water, which turns into wort, which also gets boiled. That does it all through the machine. The problem with that machine is at the end of the boil session is that keg is also what's used to cool the wort down. So the problem with the corny keg, it's got this thick plastic or rubber base to it. So I told Todd, we actually had some kegs where the bottoms come off, and it's all stainless steel, but it's round on the bottom. And I told Todd, I think it would cool down quicker if we had one without a rubber bottom, but it's got to set up right. And if you put a round bottom cylinder in a 5-gallon bucket, it's going to tilt off. And there's a anti-foam cup that sits on the top of the keg.
Right.
So it's got to sit straight up and level, or it'll foam out. And anyway, I wanted it straight up and level. So I just took a 5-gallon bucket, cut the lid to match the OD, the 8-inch OD of the keg. And now it sits up straight. And then I also did one more thing. I added water to it to create kind of like an insulation blanket. And then when you get ready, you just add ice in there, and it'll cool down in 20 minutes.
You are the most resourceful man I know, my friend. I love it. I love it that every time I go up there, or even if like there's something where I say, we need to do this, and you're like, I'll make it. Well, we could buy it and it'll come in. No, I will make it.
It's easier to make.
I know, yeah. Well, you actually enjoy it though. Like we're talking about guitar recently, and you're like, "Look at this, what I'm making," and then boom! Before I know it, you basically got your own guitar production facility. Like you are.
I still got to learn, but hey, it's fun. Might as well learn and build at the same time.
I need your attitude, man. You need to help me flip that millennial switch in my head to that perspective. Wrapping up Jesse's question, straining and filtering is probably about the same thing, right? I don't know.
Yeah, another thing too that we didn't bring up is the hot break at the end of the boil, or at the beginning of the boil.
Yes,
I should say. Sorry. So as the wort starts to boil, you're going to get proteins that come to the top. It looks like white whipped cream. You can scoop as much of that as you can off. Those are proteins. that can cause chill hazing the beer afterwards as well. So
You
I always
said
make
that.
a point to get that off the wort, skim it off.
In the Cooler Brew video, you did mention that, and that's because I only know you mentioned it because my dad during the hot break started skimming it, and I go, "What are you doing?" He goes, "James said to skim this protein." Like like clockwork, man. He's your biggest fan.
Well, I appreciate that. I've just done that for years, and it's helped.
Well, and I think if it works, right? Even if best case scenario, it only helps a little, it's helping at all. And that's what matters to my brew days is am I proactively brewing the best beer that I can? Cold crashing, we've gone over in other episodes. It's pretty straightforward. Like conditioning your beer helps to clarify it, keeping it in like a fridge. Is there a certain temperature range that cold crashing is most effective?
Anything below 40 degrees will get there quicker. I like to go to, if I can, 32 degrees, just as cold as possible. So it seems the proteins seem to fall out quicker when the colder it is. And it doesn't take, I know in German beers, they'll cold lager for, months. Right. And when it's done, everything's at the bottom. It's crystal clear.
I love a crystal clear lager too. Ooh. The last part of his question though, and one we could touch over real quick, Irish moss, he didn't say Whirlfloc, and I know they're two different things, but the Whirlfloc tablet is all I'm familiar with because it's what kegconnection.com carries, and so that's what I take home with me. Is there a preference of yours over the other to use, and are they both at the 15-minute mark?
Yeah, I think they both perform the same process, and I don't know the scientific terms behind them both. I've used them both. They both do the same job as far as I'm concerned.
So you would use whichever one. I mean, because I know even on the Spite system, and you're brewing, 18 gallons of beer or whatever the top end of beers you'll get. Are you still using a Whirlfloc during the process, or do you not even use it on that bigger batch?
I don't even use it anymore. Half the time I forget, and I've got tablets in my little accessory kit next to the brewing system, and a lot of times I just forget to put it in. But, a lot of people don't have advantages that we do with a chilled conical and, all the other stuff that we have that can help that. I think the biggest thing for clarity is just conditioning and lagering for extended amount of time. At least 14 days will get you there.
Yep. And I'm glad you wrapped it up for me, because I was going to say what's the most effective, and like you said, that cold storage. I mean, the system you have is the dream system for a home brewer, in my opinion. The conical with the chiller on it, and that thing is wonderful. The beer, what was it that we just poured out of there, or not poured out? Pardon me. You let me sample. That was the ESB, right?
Right. The true style ESB.
And you're tweaking it as you always do. Yeah. And I think your exact words were, "You're always too shy about your beer," because you're like, I think it's a little too much hops. And so I drank it, and I tried to have a poker face where I was like, "Yeah, it's terrible. You should send me home with it." But
I was disappointed, because you have to admit it was not as good as the one that was done on the Cooler Brew.
Good is relative. I liked the Cooler Brew one better, but I did too. Absolutely. It also had more time. I mean, I think this one will be interesting because I'm going to be up there in another 12 days. It'll be interesting to see where it's at then.
Sure.
Because like I said, especially some of your brews, one of my favorite things to observe with you is some beers, right when you get them ready to carbonate and keg, you're like, it's not my favorite version of it. And then like 3 weeks later, and there's still some left, and you pour it, and you go, you know what? That is really good. You're almost surprised by it.
I have no patience. That's what it is. I want to be able to make a beer that's good in 7 days. You know,
right now.
Yeah.
I need that beer good. Thank you so much, everybody who submitted the questions. Tom, Jesse, James. Thank you, sir, for spending your Wednesday afternoon with me so that I could get this ready to publish on time. I greatly appreciate you, friend. And when I get back next week, we will have another fun episode lined up. So thank you, sir, and I will talk to you next time.
See ya.
And that will do it for this episode of the Homebrew Happy Hour. If you have a question you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, visit homebrewhappyhour.com and click on the Submit a Question link at the top of the page, or now you can call or text them in by using 325-305-6107. Thank you to our show sponsor, kegconnection.com, for supporting our podcast and the home brewing community. Go to kegconnection.com, use the promo code HHH, and you'll get 5% off your order. On behalf of the ailing Todd Burns, the healthy James Carlson, and the Pearl Media Network, I'm Joshua Stubing. Thank you for listening.